We're going to talk about consideration in this area. Consideration is another element of a contract, so you must have consideration to have a valid contract. Without consideration, the contract is not binding. Consideration means that there is a benefit detriment on both sides, or both parties have to be giving up something and both parties have to be able to get something. So if you don't have consideration, as a general rule, there is no contract. So if you make a promise to make a gift, that lacks consideration. So if I promise to give a painting to Peter and I never give Peter the painting, Peter could not sue me because there's no consideration. This promise is unenforceable. It's not a binding contract, even if I make an agreement with Peter. The reason is because there's not a benefit detriment on both sides. I'm making a promise to give him a painting. I'm not going to get anything from that promise. I am going to give up something but not get anything. Peter is going to get something, the painting, but not give up anything. Now, the courts do not get into the adequacy of consideration, whether consideration is adequate or not, unless there's some evidence of fraud or undue influence. So if I change the scenario and I made a promise to give Peter a painting for $1 and Peter agreed, we have now an enforceable agreement or contract because there is a benefit detriment on both sides, even if the painting is worth a whole lot more. So I will get $1 and I will give up the painting. Peter will get the painting and he will have to give up $1. So now we have a benefit detriment on both sides. The courts don't care whether that consideration is adequate, this dollar is adequate, as long as there is some benefit detriment on both sides. If you give up something that you have a legal right to do, that is called forbearance. And forbearance is consideration. So if you have someone giving up something they have a legal right to do, that is enough to be consideration. If you're already under an existing duty to do something and you make a promise based on that existing duty, that is called a pre-existing duty. A promise based on a pre-existing duty lacks consideration. So if I already have a duty to make sure that my students do well in class through my teaching, a promise that A&T may make to give me additional bonus if my students do well lacks consideration because I already have existing duty to do that. If you make a promise based on something that has already happened or past consideration, that or past performance, that lacks consideration. So a promise based on past performance lacks consideration or is not consideration. Just because something is the right thing to do, or just because there's a legal obligation to, a moral obligation to do something, does not mean there's a legal obligation to do something. Or an easy way of saying that is a moral obligation or doing the right thing is not consideration. It's not enforceable. There are instances where there are exceptions to consideration or when you don't need to have consideration. One is if you make a pledge to a charity, for example, like a church. Even though there's no benefit detriment, there's no consideration for your promise to give money to a charity like a church, it will still be enforceable. The reason is because if charities, for example, had to show consideration, people would always be able to get out of promises that have been made to give charitable pledges. So that is a situation where consideration is not needed. When you make a pledge to a charity, it will still be enforceable.